subject for this morning is the sin of beauty. The sin of beauty. It doesn't mean beauty is sinful in itself, but there's sin that arises in the presence of beauty. So our text for this morning is found in the book of Ezekiel, one of my favorite books, and a very important book for our time today. Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 15. Ezekiel 16 verse 15. So here we understand something very interesting. I do not know how many of you have gone through Ezekiel 16, but it is a very important chapter to look into if we are even to understand the book of Revelation. Here it clearly shows that God did something and that this woman did something else. It says that the woman did something very, very strange. It says that, "But thou didst trust in thine own beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thy renown, and thou pouredst out thy fornications on every one that passed by. His it was." So this morning we're going to look and answer a few questions. First is, what is the sin of beauty? Second, what do apparel and ornaments mean to a Christian? And thirdly, how can you have perfect beauty? These are the three questions that we will ask, because according to the text that we read, we understand that something happened to the person that made them do something to the beauty that they had. When we look at our text, we can see that Ezekiel is talking about a city. He is talking about a nation. And here in verse 2, we find that Ezekiel mentions, or God actually mentions, this city called Jerusalem, which means he is talking about the kingdom of Judah, or the southern kingdom, the kingdom where the temple was. And Ezekiel writes, or God talks to Ezekiel and says, "Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations." Now, if you look in the Bible, the word abominations is a very serious word. It is the highest category of things that are classified as what God hates. So when God says something is an abomination, He is saying that He hates it to the core. We look at Jerusalem, and God talks about Jerusalem and says that Jerusalem was born in the land of Canaan, and her father was an Amorite and her mother a Hittite. We will not be going into that verse for today, but there's something that is interesting there, but we will not go in there for today. We will go to verse 4, Ezekiel 16:4, and we will read verses 4 and 5. Can somebody read that?
Salted at all, nor sweat at all. None I keep thee to do any of these unto thee, to have compassion upon thee. But thou wast cast out in the open field to loathing of thy person in the day that
So what do we see here? We see a description of what we would call in our modern day as an abortion. Even till today, we find the same practice where female babies are thrown away as unwanted garbage. So here we see that God is trying to say that you, Jerusalem, were the lowest of the low. You are the least among society. You are hated among everyone. Not only was she hated, but she was thrown away without even her navel being cut or the blood being washed from her. She was that much hated. And she was just thrown where? She was thrown in an open field, which means a place where animals can come and attack and eat and consume, and she'll be nothing. The verse says that she was not swaddled or that she was not salted. This practice of salting was there because they used this salt to preserve the skin and also to harden the skin. And that is what they used to do in those times. And that is why it says that she was not salted, which ultimately means that she was not cared for. In fact, verse 5 goes to say that she was cast in the field to the loathing of her person, which means to the hating of her person, which means those who gave birth to her hated her and threw her away. They didn't care about her. And this could also be done probably if the mother and the father involve themselves in unholy intercourse. Probably this could have been a case of prostitution, and we find that Jerusalem was there left to die. But verse 6 tells us something very interesting. It says, "And when I passed by thee and saw thee polluted," or in other words, trampled in thine own blood, lived. Yea, I said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. When did God declare that she should live? Even when she was in her blood. Which means she did not look very desirable. She did not look like, oh, I would like to take care of her. But she looked very, very ugly, very dirty, and she was rejected. But when God passed by her, He said, live. And she lived. Since the verse repeats live twice, it means that this is something important. So when we go now to verse 7, we find that God causes her to grow, to multiply as the seed of the field, or as a bud of the field, as a plant that grows. And she became great, and she became beautiful, even as excellent ornaments. And we find that she became so beautiful that the Bible describes that it says that thy breasts were fashioned and thine hair is grown, which means she became mature. But something was still missing. She was still naked and bare. Verse 8 tells us what God did later on, because He passed by her again and looked upon her. And what did He see? He saw that it was time for love. And He spread His skirt over her. In those days, if you look in the story of Ruth, you will find that when someone decides to marry a woman, the husband or husband-to-be spreads a skirt over his fiancée. And this is what God did. He's trying to show this imagery where he is now covering her with his skirt. Not simply covering her with his skirt, but to cover her nakedness. His skirt covers her nakedness. And in verse 8, we continue and we find that he swore unto her. He made a promise unto her. Not only did he spread the skirt, he then made a promise to her and entered into a covenant, a promise agreement with her. And then God said, "Thou becamest mine." Now, this description is an allegorical description of what God did from the beginning, from Abraham onward till Moses. And we find that God, even though they were not a very great nation, God still brought them, covered them, and said, "You are mine." And not only did he do that, he later on took her, after covering her, he washed her with water and anointed her with oil. These are special things which we will not go into today. But it is interesting that God washed her with water and anointed her with oil. In verse 10, we find that it says that she was clothed by God with broidered work and shod with badger skin and with fine linen and with silk. That's something we need to consider, because sometimes we as Adventists talk about beauty, talk about apparel, like as if God hates things that are beautiful. But if you look into Ezekiel 16, you will find that God describes what he did with Israel, and sometimes it may not sit with us today. Of course, we understand that Israel was in rebellion, Judah was in rebellion, and God needed to speak in the language that they understood. But this is something we also need to consider. God covered her with things that are beautiful. God covered her with things that are lovely, with fine linen and silk, and with badger skin, which is broidered, very beautiful. In verse 11, it says that he also decked her with ornaments and put bracelets upon her hand and a chain upon her neck. Not only did he do that, he put a jewel on her forehead and earrings in her ear and a beautiful crown on her head. If you would take a more literal translation than that of verse 12, you will find that the word translated as jewel on her forehead can actually be translated as give her a ring for her nose, because the word for forehead actually is more used to talk about the nose and breath and anger. So we find here that he gave her a lot of jewels. And not only that, he also covered her with gold and silver and with all beautiful clothes. Not only did God cover her with clothes and jewels, he also gave her honey and oil, and also looked at her and said, "You are exceeding beautiful." And she prospered in the kingdom. She grew and was very well off in the kingdom. And now we come to the main part of this part of the story, or this part of Ezekiel 16, in verse 14. Can somebody read verse 14?
And thy renown went forth among the heathen for thy beauty, for it was perfect through my comeliness which I had put upon thee, saith the Lord God.
So here we see that God saw her and describes her and said that her fame went through the heathen, through the other nations, to the Gentiles, and they saw her beauty. And her beauty was perfect. It was whole. It did not lack anything. But how? Through my comeliness. Her beauty through my comeliness. It's interesting that God calls the beauty that she has as her beauty. Who gave it to her? God. But He still considers it as her beauty, which we will get into later. But we find that she was perfect through my comeliness, which I had put upon thee, saith the Lord. So God put His comeliness upon her, and she was beautiful. And then we come to the negative verse where it says, But thou didst trust in thine own beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thy renown. So what did she do with the beauty that she had? She took it and she put her trust in her beauty, in her greatness, rather than in the one who gave her the beauty. If you look through the next verses, we will find that whatever God gave now is described in a very negative sense and in an opposite sense, where she now uses it for something else than its desired purpose. In verses 16 to 21, we will find that, actually from 15 to 21, we will find that she first has fornications with those who pass by her. Then she offers flour and honey to the images that she creates from the gold and the jewels that she has. She makes images of men, and then she covers them with the clothes that God gave her. And finally, it says that she sacrificed their children. If you look into what Israel did, they went after other gods and they sacrificed their children to the gods of the heathens, rather than caring about the God of Israel, or the real God that is in heaven. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 22 shows how what God had done before totally reversed, and now she's back to square one. Verse 22 says that in all thine abominations and thy whoredoms thou hast not remembered the days of thy youth, or it could also be translated as your early days or your young days, when thou wast naked and bare and was polluted in thy blood. See? She removed all her clothes, she removed everything, and she gave it to everyone else. What is she now? She's naked, but she didn't remember that is what she was before. That God brought her out for a purpose, to make her beautiful and for her to be happy. But Ezekiel does not only talk about beauty over here. Ezekiel also talks about beauty in connection to the king of Tyre, or the prince of Tyre, or the nation of Tyre itself. Talks about Egypt also, and uses the word beauty there. But in Ezekiel 28:17, here also the same word is used, talking about beauty. But it is another creature. Someone else decides to do something with the beauty that God has given. Of course, this chapter has its own time and can be given to another study. But we find here that Lucifer, or the anointed cherub, had something going on with him. Ezekiel 28:17 says, Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by the reason of thy brightness. Do we see here? With Jerusalem, she had a problem with beauty. Here, The anointed cherub that covers also had a problem with beauty. When we look at in the beginning, when God created the world and made Adam and Eve, He had a land that had gold and different stones. In Genesis 2:11 and 12, we find this there, because it says that the name of the first land, or the first river, was Pison, which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of the land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. Which means when God created the world, He created the world with jewels. He created the world with all these beautiful things. But what did Adam and Eve do? In fact, when God created the world, He created man. But after He created man, He created one of the most beautiful creatures known to man. And that is a woman. But what did Adam and Eve do with the beauty that God gave them? Eve, the most beautiful creature, went and saw another beautiful creature and sinned. And we also find now Adam saw the beautiful creature that was in front of him, and he also sinned. Because he said, how can I give up this beauty for whatever? So he also sinned by looking at the beauty that was there. And we find because of all of that, God did something. God, what did He do? In Genesis 3:21, can somebody read Genesis 3:21?
Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothed them. Both make coats of skin and clothed.
So here we see, again, here in Genesis, we see the Lord made clothes, just like He did for Israel in Ezekiel 16. Made clothes for them and clothed their nakedness. So we can understand here, it looks similar. Ezekiel 16 and Genesis 3 look similar in the reason why God gave what He gave. Why God covered them with what He covered. And what is it? Why did God cover the Adam and Eve with sheepskin? Why did God cover Jerusalem with all these clothes and silk and linen and so on? He did that, why? Because they were naked. Because for God, nakedness is not complete, perfect beauty. It might be a little beautiful, but it's not perfect, complete beauty. But it is incomplete beauty. And God did all of that for them. But what did they decide to do? In fact, when God created Adam and Eve, they were perfect. They had everything. But they threw it away. They didn't want the covering. Here in Ezekiel also, she did not want her covering, but she gave it away. And we find they both became naked, and God had to cover them again. But how did God cover them again? We can only find this in what Jesus did when He came down. If we turn to Isaiah 53 verse 2, we will find that Jesus did something to cover. What did He do? It says in Isaiah 53:2, He hath no form nor honor when we observe him, nor appearance when we desire him. Or in the King James Version it says, he had no form or comeliness, that when we shall see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. When Jesus came to this world, he did not come as a king. He didn't come with all the gold and silver and all the physical beauty that we would consider as desirable. But he came similar to how we find the woman. No form, no honor, no great appearance. Nobody went to Jesus simply because he looked good or because he was so great. He had no form, no honor. In connection with this, Philippians 2, 6 and 7 says that Jesus, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, just like Lucifer did. But what did he do? But made himself of no reputation, and took upon himself the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. While we see that God desired to give everything to his creatures, they did not desire any of that, but used whatever God gave them for their own twisted purposes. And that is what we find here that God does. He does the opposite to reverse the effect of what sin has caused to humanity. He becomes naked himself. When we look at pictures of Jesus crucified, we always see something that's covering him. But in reality, the truth is, when someone is crucified, he hangs naked. Every single piece of cloth is stripped from him, and he hangs as a shame for all people who pass by to see. And this is what Jesus did for his own bride. If you look at the end of Ezekiel 16, we find that God is still trying to say, you can come back, I will make sure that something happens. And that is what we find in the New Testament. Jesus makes sure that his people can be with him. He knows that they are stupid. He knows that they are foolish. And he tries to find a way that can make them come back to him. When we look and think about the word beauty, many times we have heard the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But that is not what the Bible teaches. There's of course maybe small things you could consider that, but that kind of beauty is subjective beauty. Every person says, I like this because I think it's beautiful. I like this because I think it's beautiful. But who is the one that really defines what is beautiful? It is God. Because when God gave these things to Israel, he knew it was beautiful, and this is what made them perfect in beauty. And that is why we can understand that the Bible teaches that beauty is in the eye of the Creator. It is the one who knows what the thing is created for. Beauty is in the eye of the Creator. When we look at how we consider beauty today, we do not want to look at it in this way, but we want to have our own kind of beauty. Or we use the beauty that God has given us for our own purposes. And when we look at the book of Revelation, we will find that God has two women in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, where one in Revelation 12:17 keeps the commandments of God and has the testimony of Jesus. The other has Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Do we see what happened to the woman in Ezekiel 16? the woman of Ezekiel 16 becomes the woman of Revelation 17. Because she did not leave all the things that she was doing, she became the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Did God desire that to happen to her? No. But this is what happened. And why? Because she did not know how to treat her beauty. She didn't know what to do with her beauty. But she took the beauty and she trusted in it. She believed in it. She put all her life on it rather than putting her life on God. But we also, fortunately, find that Jesus, through His sacrifice, has His own bride. His bride that is pure. And it is interesting, and we should observe this, because in the Old Testament, the woman is described with all ornaments and all beautiful clothes. But in the New Testament, she is described as something else. The one that has all the ornaments and the beautiful clothes is the one that took the beauty and the grace and the providence of God and used it for her own self. And that is something we need to remember. Because if God created Lucifer and Jerusalem and Eden, all beautiful and good, and they use that as a reason to sin, don't you think we need to be careful about what we think about beauty? All of us want to look beautiful. All of us want to be beautiful. But at the cost of what? At the cost of our eternal life? Because when God gave them and made them beautiful, they took that beauty and used it for themselves. Romans 1 also talks about it in the same way, or a similar way, where they took the glory of God and they used it for themselves. Beauty is not bad. Beauty is not evil. In fact, the Bible uses beauty to talk about Jesus Himself. But when His creatures take that beauty and put their life on it, then the only path that they have is destruction. But in the New Testament, you find that God shows another way. It is not a way of grand adornment, but it is a way of simple adornment. How do we find the bride in Revelation chapter 12? She simply has a crown of 12 stars and a robe of the sun. Very simple and very beautiful compared to the woman that is dressed in scarlet and purple. Why? It is not because God does not love beauty. It is not because God does not love jewels. It is not because God does not love the things that are good. But if it was hard for those who are blessed by God abundantly to stay with Him because they just use it for themselves, don't you think God should find another way? And that's what we find here. Because when Jesus came to this world, He left all that was beautiful. And He came and lived as an ugly human being. As a wretched human being. Without all the glory that He had. To show us that even though we do not have that glory, we can still have the glory not outside, but inside. The beauty not necessarily outside, but inside. Anyway, ultimately, Revelation promises that we will be able to experience all the jewels and the gold and the silver in heaven. God is not against all of that. But the problem is the sin of beauty. What is the sin of beauty according to what we have learned? The sin of beauty is the trust and pride of one's own beauty instead of God's. Or instead of God Himself. The trust and the pride of one's beauty instead of God. that is a sin of beauty. What do apparel and ornaments mean to a Christian? It simply means what? One's character or condition, or their stance before God. Because the reason why God covered Adam and Eve, the reason why God covered the woman of Ezekiel 16 is simply so that they would not reveal their nakedness and that they would be covered by His character. When we see different people dressing in different ways, it reflects from what is inside. What a person is feeling, who a person is, shows in what they wear. And if they have the character of God inside, they will reveal it in what they wear. Because whatever God gives them, they will wear it, because they believe that the clothes that they have, the apparel that they have, the ornaments that they have are ornaments that are from God and that give glory to God. The reason why God covered them with clothes is to be an eternal reminder, or at least a reminder on this earth, that the only way they can be covered by their their nakedness could be covered is by the righteousness of Christ. Whenever we wear clothes, we commemorate the sacrifice of Jesus in Genesis chapter 3. The reason why we wear clothes is not simply to look beautiful, but because we remember what Jesus has done for us. And thirdly, how can you be perfect, or how can you have perfect beauty? First is to know your husband, Jesus. To know your God, Jesus. This woman here did not know God. Adam and Eve did not know God in the way that they were supposed to know. They didn't trust in Him, but they trusted in their own selves, in their own beauty. But when we know our God, we will always put our trust in Him. When we don't know God, that is a problem. But when we know God, we can put our trust in Him. Secondly, is to know who we are. We find that the woman here in Ezekiel 16 forgot who she was. She forgot that she was naked and bare. She forgot the condition that she was in blood. But the only way that we can have perfect beauty is if we know who we are, or if you know who you are. And what should we know? We should know that we without God are wretched, poor, blind, and naked sinners. Criminals, cosmic criminals. We normally do not think of ourselves as bad. But when God looks at you, what does He see? He sees exactly what He saw in Ezekiel 16. A rebellious child. A child who uses everything that he has given for evil purposes. And third, we find that the only way we can have perfect beauty is by being washed and clothed by Jesus Himself. When we look at our acceptance with God, many times we look at ourselves. But when we look at this story here, we find that our acceptance with God is not because of our beauty. God doesn't accept us because He sees, oh, you're so nice, you're so wonderful, you're so lovely. He doesn't say that. How did this baby look in the field? Was she beautiful? She was trampled on. She was in dirt. She was in blood. Not something that would be desired of. But our acceptance with God is not because of our beauty, but He accepts us to give us His. The reason why God accepts us is not because we are beautiful, but because He wants to give us His beauty. And that is what we can remember today. We can remember that the only way for us to have perfect beauty is for us 2. First, know who our husband is, know who we are or who you are, and be washed and clothed by him. Let us always remember that our acceptance with God is not because of our own beauty, but he accepts us so that he can give us his. He made a covenant with Israel, with Jerusalem, so that he could give his beauty to her. That is why we need to remember the sin of beauty in Ezekiel 16:15. And remember what she did with her beauty. For Ezekiel 16:15 says, "But thou didst trust in thine own beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thine renown, and pouredst out thy fornications on every one that passed by. His it was." If you look carefully through all the text, you will find that Jerusalem paid people to fornicate with her. How far do we go in our sinful acts? Do we run after the evil that is around us? And do we look for pleasure and beauty outside of God? We as a people need to know and understand what is beautiful to God. Because many times we consider this thing or that thing beautiful and we say, I like it, so God should like it too. But the reality is, God has his own standard. And God knows what is beautiful. Why? Because he created everything. And when we know what is beautiful for God, we will be safe. But if not, whatever beauty that we have, we will use it and trust in it and destroy our own selves and be naked and bare. And for this reason, let us remember verse 14. Because it says that thy renown went forth among the heathen for thy beauty, and it was perfect, it was whole, through my comeliness, which I had put upon thee, saith the Lord God. So this is what we need to remember. We need to remember that beauty is a very good thing, but it's a very powerful thing, that if we do not know how to take care of it, we will destroy our own selves with it. So as the world searches for beauty, we know that that true beauty is found in the Word of God. So let us look into the Word of God and let us learn of this perfect beauty. Because if you want to have perfect beauty, the only way is through the comeliness of God. Because God is the one that gives us his beauty, not because of who we are, but simply because he wants to.